Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud through every version of the human story that television was capable of containing. He had seen families fall apart over wrong answers and come together over right ones. He had heard revelations that made the studio audience gasp, and revelations that made them cry, and, occasionally, revelations that left 200 people in complete silence while everyone processed what had just been said out loud in front of cameras. He believed, genuinely, that nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. On a Wednesday morning in the fall of 2023, a family of 5 walked onto the Family Feud stage from Dayton, Ohio, and one of them was carrying a secret that had been carried in silence for 20 years. His name was Thomas Garrett. Everyone who loved him called him Tommy. He was 61 years old, broad through the chest and gray at the temples, and he had the particular quality of stillness that certain men develop when they have spent a very long time being careful about what they let show on their face. He wore a burgundy dress shirt with a neat collar and dark slacks, and he stood at the contestants' podium the way men stand when they have learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is look like something is wrong. Beside him in the family lineup, his wife Diane, 58 years old, a retired school nurse with silver-streaked natural hair and small gold earrings that caught the studio lights beautifully. She had the warm, measured presence of a woman who had spent 3 decades managing other people's emergencies without losing her composure. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, composed and bright-eyed, the way women stand when they are genuinely happy to be somewhere and genuinely proud of the people beside them. On Tommy's other side stood their 3 adult children. Brandon, 35, a software engineer from Columbus who had his father's broad shoulders and his mother's direct, patient gaze. Keisha, 32, an elementary school teacher from Cincinnati who laughed easily and often and had already charmed everyone in the warm-up before the cameras came on. And Marcus, 25, the youngest, recent college graduate, now working in human resources at a logistics firm in Dayton, a coincidence that would in about 20 minutes carry an irony that nobody in that room was yet aware of. Steve Harvey looked at this family during the warm-up and saw what he always saw in good families, the specific ease of people who knew each other's rhythms, the way Diane touched Tommy's arm without looking at him when she made a point, the way Keisha and Marcus stood close together like they had spent a childhood sharing space and had never quite lost the habit. The way Brandon stood slightly back from the group, watchful, carrying the oldest child's particular quality of always having one eye on the whole picture. They were a lovely family. What Steve Harvey did not yet know was that the lovely family had been built on a foundation that was entirely different from what most of them believed it to be, and that the man in the burgundy shirt had been carrying the full weight of that difference alone for 20 years. Thomas Eugene Garrett was born in 1962 in Dayton, Ohio. The oldest of 4 children raised by Winston and Betty Garrett in a house on Grafton Avenue that was small and immaculate and held more love than its square footage should have been able to contain. Winston worked the floor at the Delphi Auto Parts plant for 28 years. Betty worked the register at a Kroger supermarket for 22. Neither of them had been to college. Neither of them had expected to. Their generation understood work differently from the one that followed, not as a path to fulfillment or identity, but as the price of keeping your family fed and housed, and able to look the world in the face without owing anyone anything. What Winston and Betty Garrett gave their children was not money. It was the understanding that your word was your bond, your name was your character, and the measure of a man was what he did when nobody was watching and nothing made it easy. Tommy absorbed all of it before he was old enough to articulate any of it. He was a steady child and a steadier teenager, not flashy, not easily rattled. The kind of boy who finished what he started and did not make promises he was not prepared to keep. He was good at math. He was good at fixing things. He had a patience for detail that his teachers always noted, and his younger siblings never fully appreciated until they were old enough to need his help. His 3rd-grade teacher wrote on his report card that he was the most careful student she had ever had, and by that she meant not cautious, but precise, the kind of precision that looks like slowness from the outside and turns out to be thoroughness. He graduated from Meadowdale High School in 1980 and went directly to work. College was not a realistic option, there was no money for it, and he was needed at home. He worked 2 years at a warehouse shipping company, loading freight, learning routes, learning how logistics actually worked from the ground up rather than from a textbook. He was good at it. He had the kind of spatial intelligence that made loading a truck feel like solving a puzzle, and the physical endurance to do it 8 hours a day without complaint. He was promoted twice in those 2 years. His manager at the time told him he had the instincts of someone who understood the whole system, not just his piece of it. He filed that away the way he filed most things, quietly without making a show of it, and put it to use. He met Diane Simmons in 1984 at a church picnic in West Dayton on a Saturday afternoon in late August. She was 20 years old, studying at Wright State University on a partial scholarship, working weekends at a pediatric clinic to cover the rest. She was the kind of person who walked into a space and made it feel more organized. Not through authority, but through the quiet competence of someone who already knew what she was doing, and was already doing it. Tommy stood across a picnic table from her for 2 hours, and talked about nothing in particular, and went home that evening convinced that she was the most interesting person he had ever met. He told his mother that night. His mother looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Then don't you waste any time." He didn't. They married in June of 1986. He was 24. She was 22. It was not a large wedding. It was a true one. Winston Garrett cried during the ceremony, quietly, in the way of men who have trained themselves to be contained and fined, at the specific moments that matter, that the training only goes so far. By the time Diane finished her nursing certification in 1988, and Brandon was born in 1989, Tommy had worked his way up through 3 promotions at a regional logistics company called Consolidated Freight Solutions. He had gone from loading dock to dispatch coordinator to regional routing analyst, learning the full architecture of how goods moved from one place to another, and finding, year after year, that he had an instinct for the inefficiencies that cost companies money, and a patience for the systems that fixed them. By 1995, at 33 years old, he held the title of Regional Operations Manager, overseeing distribution coordination across 4 Midwestern states. It was not a glamorous job, but it was a real one. A salary that covered the mortgage and the car payments, and the slow, careful building of savings, and a title that Tommy wore with quiet, genuine pride. He had built what his father had told him was possible if you worked without stopping, and kept your word every time. He had, by the standards of his neighborhood and his family, and the man he had understood himself to be when he started, made it. In 2000, the company was acquired by a larger national firm called Consolidated Logistics Group. Most of the regional management structure was absorbed into the new operation. Tommy was retained with his title intact and his salary adjusted slightly upward. Diane had moved from the clinic to the Dayton School District as a nursing coordinator. They had 3 children now. Keisha had arrived in 1991, Marcus in 1998, and a house in West Dayton that was larger than the one Tommy had grown up in, and a life that matched, point for point, every picture Winston Garrett had described when he talked about what was possible for his children. And then, in March of 2003, Consolidated Logistics Group eliminated its regional management tier entirely. 400 people received notice on a Thursday morning. Tommy Garrett was among them. He was 41 years old. Marcus was 4 years old. Keisha was 11. Brandon was 13, and had just made the junior varsity baseball team, and had come home 2 days before the notice arrived, and told his father it was the best week of his life. Diane did not know yet. He did not tell her that night. He drove home from the building in the clothes he had worn to collect his things, made dinner, helped Brandon with algebra, put Marcus to bed, sat with Diane while she told him about her day, and carried the layoff notice in his breast pocket the entire evening like something that was changing temperature and he did not yet know what to do with. He told her on Saturday, 2 days later when the children were out. She was steady about it. That was Diane, always the one who went calm when things went sideways. The emergency room nurse's instinct to assess the situation and stabilize it before allowing herself to feel it. She said they had savings. She said her income would cover the essential bills while he looked. She said he would find something. She said it the way she meant it, with the specific quiet confidence of a woman who had spent 17 years watching this man handle every difficult thing that came at him. She believed it completely. He believed it too, in that moment. He was wrong about the timeline. He applied everywhere he could reach. He updated his resume with the full weight of 15 years' experience and sent it to 12 companies in the first week. He reached out to every professional contact he had built across a decade and a half in regional logistics. He was direct in interviews. He was well prepared. He knew the field. He was, by objective measure, an excellent candidate. He had 2 promising interviews in the second week. 1 callback. 1 letter explaining, politely, that the position had been filled internally. By the end of the 3rd week, the picture had clarified into something he had not allowed himself to see coming. The regional management jobs available in Dayton that matched his experience were paying between $38,000 and $43,000 a year in the current market, a significant reduction from what he had been earning. The positions that paid what he had earned required either a 4-year degree he had never obtained or a relocation that was simply not possible. Diane's career was in Dayton. The children were in school in Dayton. The house was in Dayton. His parents were in Dayton. He was not going to pick up his family and move them because a corporation had decided his title was redundant. He sat with the gap between what was available and what his family's life required, and he looked at it honestly. The way he had learned as a boy to look at every problem, without romanticizing it and without running from it. The gap was real. And then he thought about what filling it would look like. He thought about telling Diane that after 15 years of building, they were going to take a significant step back. He thought about the adjustments Brandon pulled from the travel baseball program. Keisha's dance lessons scaled down, the savings account drawn on while he retrained or waited for the market to offer something better. He thought about what it would feel like to sit at his kitchen table every morning in a house that he had told his wife and children was secure, and feel the specific helplessness of a man who could not make the numbers work. He thought about Brandon at 13, who had just made the junior varsity team and who looked at his father with the uncomplicated admiration of a boy who believed his father could handle anything. He thought about all of it, carefully, for 3 weeks. And then, on a Tuesday night in early April, sitting alone at the kitchen table at 11:30 after Diane had gone to bed, Tommy opened the Dayton Public Schools website and found a posting for a night shift custodial position at Jefferson Middle School. The pay was not what he had been making, but it was steady, union work with full benefits, which mattered enormously now with 3 children and a mortgage. The hours, 10 at night to 6 in the morning, meant he would be home when the children left for school. He would be home when they came back. He would be present for every afternoon, every dinner, every homework session, every parent-teacher conference, every Saturday baseball game. Diane would never need to adjust her schedule by a single day. The children would experience no visible disruption to the shape of their lives. It would also mean that nobody in his family could know what he was doing. He sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours. He thought about his father, who had worked a plant floor job for 28 years without complaint and without apology, and who had never once made his children feel that the work was beneath him, because he had understood, in the specific way of men of his generation, that the work was not the point, the outcome was the point. The family was the point. Tommy filled out the application at 12:45 in the morning. He told Diane the next day that he had accepted a position with a small logistics consulting firm that serviced regional distribution clients on a night schedule. He said the pay was comparable and had growth potential. He said the night hours worked in the family's favor. He gave the name of a firm that had no web presence and no listing that would ever return a search result. He told her the work was good. Then he drove to Jefferson Middle School, sat down with the principal, disclosed everything about his professional background with complete honesty, the title he had held, the layoff, the family situation, the decision he had made, and accepted the position of night custodian at the hourly rate posted. He was 41 years old. He was there for 20 years. The life Tommy Garrett built inside that decision was, by any honest accounting, remarkable. Not remarkable in a visible or celebrated way. Remarkable in the way that matters most, quietly, methodically year after year. in the precise direction of his family's security and dignity. He worked the night shift at Jefferson Middle School 5 days a week and took overtime and weekend coverage whenever it was offered. He was meticulous in his work from the first night, the same quality of careful, thorough attention that he had brought to freight routing systems, now applied to hallway floors and bathroom fixtures and the temperamental heating system in the East Wing that nobody else on the maintenance staff fully understood but that Tommy had taken apart and put back together within 18 months until he knew every peculiarity of it. The principal, a woman named Dr. Carol Simmons, who had been at Jefferson since 1998, would say much later that Tommy Garrett was among the 2 or 3 most conscientious employees she had managed in a 25-year career as an administrator. He never called in sick unless he genuinely was. He never left a task half done. He treated the building with the kind of care that only comes from someone who has decided that the work matters, not because someone is watching, but because the alternative is doing it badly, and he was not built for doing things badly. He wore his work uniform to and from the school in the dark hours of the night. He kept a set of dress clothes in his car that he changed into on workdays before driving home at 6 in the morning, so that any neighbor who happened to see him arrive home would see what they had always seen, a man in office clothes coming home from a long day of managing things. He maintained the fiction with the precise, patient consistency of a man who has something real to protect and understands that the protection requires his full attention every single day. He had business cards made and a professional voicemail number that connected to a recorded message he had scripted carefully. He kept current enough with industry trends to hold any surface conversation about logistics management without raising any flags. He spoke to Brandon as the boy grew older and began thinking about his own future, about the principles of operations work, systems, efficiency, the management of complexity, because all of that knowledge was real and remained real regardless of what he did with his evenings. He filed his taxes every year as a school district employee, listing his occupation in terms general enough not to raise questions. He managed the household finances entirely, which Diane had been relieved to let him handle from the beginning, because numbers were his strength and she trusted him with them completely, and this arrangement never changed. He slept from 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon on workdays while the children were at school. He was awake, dressed, and present every afternoon when they came home. He helped with homework at the kitchen table the way his own father had never been able to, because Winston worked days and was always tired by evening. He attended every school event, every athletic game, every recital, every teacher conference, every graduation ceremony. He coached Marcus's Little League team for 3 seasons and was, by all accounts from other parents, one of the most patient coaches the league had seen. He was, by every visible measure, a fully present father. He was also, over those 20 years, quietly putting all 3 of his children through college. Brandon attended Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship and graduated in 2011 with a degree in computer science. The scholarship covered a meaningful portion of the cost. Tommy covered the rest: tuition, room and board, books, the incidental costs that add up over 4 years. From his school custodian salary, supplemented by overtime and weekend coverage, and the elimination of every personal expenditure he could honestly justify cutting. He did not buy a new car for 11 years. He did not take a vacation for himself in 20 years, though he saved carefully for the anniversary trips he and Diane took every 3 years, which he told her were funded by a small investment account he managed, which was technically true, in that he had a savings account and was regularly adding to it what he did not spend on anything else. He applied for every scholarship and grant available to Brandon without letting Brandon know he was looking, researching the options with the thoroughness of a man who understood that every dollar of scholarship funding was a dollar of overtime he would not have to work. When a grant came through, he told Brandon his financial aid package had improved. Brandon thanked the university. Tommy thanked whatever combination of luck and preparation had made it possible. Keisha attended Wright State on a partial scholarship in 2009 and graduated in 2013 with an education degree. Tommy repeated the same process: the research, the grant applications, the careful management of costs. Keisha was practical about money in the way children of careful households often are. And she never questioned the numbers her parents provided because the numbers always added up. Marcus, the youngest, the surprise, the one born in 1998 when Tommy was already 36 and already deep into the years of the night shift. Marcus graduated from the University of Dayton in May 2023, 5 months before the Family Feud taping. Tommy had been at the graduation ceremony in the front section with Diane and Keisha and Brandon, and he had watched his youngest child walk across that stage in cap and gown, and he had felt something he did not have a word for that was larger than pride, and quieter than relief, and more permanent than either. 20 years, 3 children through college, every one of them debt-free. Every one of them standing in the world with the foundation he had decided on a Tuesday night in April of 2003 that they deserved. The house on Grafton Street, not the same house Winston had raised his children in, but close. The same neighborhood, the same quality of block, was paid off in full in September of 2019. Tommy had made the final mortgage payment on a Tuesday morning after driving home from his last shift of the week. He had parked in the driveway and sat in the car in the pale early morning light with the payment confirmation on his phone, and had stayed there for several minutes before he was ready to go inside. He had never told a single person what any of it had cost him. He had told the truth to exactly one person, Dr. Carol Simmons, the principal of Jefferson Middle School, on the night he was hired, because he was not willing to take a position without the person hiring him understanding who she was hiring. Dr. Simmons had listened to the full account. She had looked at Thomas Garrett for a long moment afterward. Then she had said, "I can respect that." She kept his confidence for 20 years. The pre-game conversation with the Garrett family started exactly the way pre-game conversations always started. Steve Harvey working his way through the lineup with the warmth and fast timing that made every family feel, within minutes, that they had known him for years. He had teased Brandon about Columbus. Columbus, Ohio? What do you do over there? Root for wrong things. Brandon had laughed the easy laugh of a man completely secure in himself. He had talked with Keisha about teaching second grade, and she had told him something about a student's homework answer that made Steve repeat it to the whole audience, with the timing of someone who recognized a great story and knew exactly what to do with it. He had welcomed Diane with genuine warmth and asked about her nursing career, and she had described 30 years of emergency management with a calm understatement that made the audience appreciate her immediately. And then he turned to Marcus, the youngest, the HR professional, 25 years old and proud of his new career, and asked what he did for work. Human resources, Marcus said, nodding. I'm at a logistics company, actually, ironically, same field my dad spent his whole career in. Is that right? Steve said, glancing at Tommy with interest. Logistics runs in the family? Oh, for sure, Marcus said. I actually asked Dad for advice when I was interviewing. He knew exactly which questions to ask about the company's operation structure. Steve turned to Tommy and smiled. So you're the family expert, he said. How long have you been in that world, Tommy? Tommy smiled. Easy, steady, most of my career, he said. Something in that answer, not the words themselves but the slight softness on the word most, made Steve Harvey pause for half a second before continuing. It was a barely perceptible pause, the kind most people would not notice. Steve Harvey was not most people. What company are you with? Steve asked. Tommy gave the name. Consolidated Logistics Group. The name of a company that had laid him off and essentially dissolved its regional structure by 2005, and existed now primarily as a name he had practiced, saying without hesitation for 2 decades. Steve nodded, made a small sound of acknowledgement, and then Marcus, casually, completely without awareness of what he was setting in motion, said the thing. Yeah, I actually tried to look up Dad's company once when I was putting together a presentation on regional logistics history. Couldn't find much on them. I think they went through a lot of restructuring pretty early on. He said it lightly. The kind of comment that people make when they are talking about something peripheral and don't realize it is actually the center of everything. The studio was warm and loud and relaxed, and Tommy Garrett went completely still, not in a visible way, not in a way the audience could have registered, but his eyes stopped moving, and his breath did the thing it does when a person is managing something very quickly in a small amount of time. and the smile on his face remained exactly where it was, held in place by 2 decades of practice, rather than by anything currently felt. Steve Harvey saw it. He saw the breath that started and didn't quite land. He saw the fractional tightening around the eyes. He saw the smile that was being maintained rather than lived. He tilted his head very slightly. "Tommy," he said, not with suspicion, not with the setup of a punchline, with the quiet, careful attention of a man who has learned, over many years of standing very close to people, that the small things are always worth following. "What are you not saying right now?" The studio did not go quiet immediately. It took a second, 1 beat, 2, before the audience sensed the shift in the air and the laughter and conversation died down and the room settled into something closer to attention. Diane turned to look at her husband. Brandon straightened almost imperceptibly. Keisha let the smile she had been carrying through the whole warm-up settle into something more careful and watchful. Tommy Garrett stood at the podium. And 20 years of precision and patience and careful management. 20 years of holding a specific shape so that the people he loved could stand comfortably inside it, shifted beneath him like the ground after something deep has finally moved. He looked at Steve Harvey, and he said, "I haven't been in logistics for 20 years. The studio went still the way it goes still when something real has just entered the room and everyone can feel it." Diane's head came up sharply. "What I told my family," Tommy continued, and his voice was completely level with the particular steadiness of a man who has said something there is no walking back from and made his peace with that before the words came out, "is that I've been working in operations management this whole time. Consulting, logistics coordination. I've been telling them that since 2003. He stopped. "That isn't true." Nobody in the studio moved. "I was laid off in March of 2003, he said. From Consolidated Logistics Group. The whole regional management tier was eliminated. 400 people got their notice on the same Thursday morning." His hands rested flat on the podium surface. Completely still. "I spent 3 weeks looking for equivalent work. Couldn't find it at the right salary in Dayton. Couldn't relocate. Diane's career was here. The kids were in school here. This was our home and I wasn't going to uproot my family." He looked straight ahead. "So I took a night shift custodian position at Jefferson Middle School in Dayton, Ohio, and I worked there for 20 years. The silence that followed was the complete kind. And then, from the family lineup, in a voice that was barely above a whisper but that the microphones caught with perfect clarity, Tommy. It was Diane. He turned to look at her. Her expression was not what he had spent 20 years preparing for, not anger, not betrayal, not collapse. It was the expression of a woman who has just been handed an entirely new version of a story she thought she knew completely and is taking the full weight of it into her hands and feeling what it is. "You mopped floors," she said. It was not a question. She was saying it out loud because saying it was the only way to understand that it was real. "Yes," he said, "for 20 years. "Yes," she was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of feeling but the opposite of it. So much feeling arriving so fast that there is no pathway to sound yet. "Every night," she said. 5 nights a week, he said. "Sometimes weekends." She pressed both hands flat against her own sternum, the way people do when something is physically landing in their chest. "Tommy," she said again, and this time there was something cracking in the word. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at his wife with the direct, clear gaze of a man who has rehearsed this conversation in his mind for 20 years and is now simply saying the thing he has always known to be true. "Because you believed in what we had built," he said. "I wasn't going to let a layoff change what you saw when you looked at this family, or what the kids saw." He paused, and the pause was the weight of everything it contained. "I wasn't willing for that to be the thing they remembered about their childhood. The year everything changed. I wasn't going to give them that." Diane absorbed that. She was a nurse. She had spent 30 years managing emergencies by refusing to let the size of the problem determine the size of her response. She had held other people's children through crises and sat beside people in their worst moments and maintained the kind of steadiness that looks effortless from the outside and costs everything it costs. She made a sound then that was not quite a word, something between an exhale and grief and recognition, and crossed the distance between her position in the lineup and her husband's position at the podium, and she put both arms around Tommy Garrett's neck the way she had done since they were 22 years old, and Tommy Garrett held onto his wife in the middle of the Family Feud stage and closed his eyes, and the 20 years of holding his breath silently released into something he did not yet have a name for. The studio had been moving through stages of quiet and sound since this began, but what filled the room now was not managed silence. It was the sound of 200 people releasing something at the same time. An exhale that became applause before it had finished becoming anything, sustained and building, the kind that starts from one place and rolls outward until the whole room is part of it. Brandon moved first from the lineup. He was 35 years old, a software engineer, a man who dealt in logic and systems and the specific satisfaction of things that worked the way they were designed to work. He came forward with the expression of someone whose entire architecture of a thing is being rebuilt in real time, piece by piece, with each new piece making more sense than the picture he had been carrying. He put his hand on his father's shoulder. Tommy turned. Brandon looked at him with an expression that no one could have rehearsed, and no camera had been waiting for. "Dad," he said. Just the single word. Tommy looked at his oldest child. "Ohio State," Brandon said quietly. "My tuition." "You," he stopped. "Recalculated, you covered that on a custodian's salary. You worked for it," Tommy said. "I just covered what your work didn't reach." "On a custodian's salary," Brandon said again, not as an accusation but as a man making himself say a thing clearly so he can understand it clearly. "It didn't matter what it was called," Tommy said. "What mattered was that it covered what you needed." Brandon's jaw tightened. He nodded once, slowly, and then he gripped his father's shoulder the way men grip things when there are no words sufficient for what they feel, and the hands become the only honest language available. Keisha was crying openly, without self-consciousness, in the full and ungoverned way of someone who is not managing her emotion, but simply experiencing it. She reached past her brother and took her father's hand and held it without speaking, because she had learned from him, from this man, that some things did not require words, and she understood that about him and about herself. Marcus stood slightly back. He was 25 years old. He was the youngest. He was the one who had pulled the thread. He worked in human resources. He had processed layoffs. He knew what a termination notice looked like and what it did to a person's face when they received one. He had sat across from people and handed them the paperwork for the end of something they had built and tried to say the right things and driven home afterward, sometimes in the specific silence of someone who knows they have witnessed something that costs the person in front of them far more than the meeting room walls will contain. He stood and looked at his father and was very quiet for a long moment. "I work in human resources," he said finally, and his voice had in it the particular quality of someone arriving at the full meaning of something for the first time. "I know what layoffs do to people. I know exactly what that morning looked like, what it cost you." He shook his head slowly. "You did all of that alone. For 20 years, you did all of that and never told any of us." "You were 4 years old," Tommy said. "You could have told me when I was older." "You were in college when you were old enough," Tommy said. "Every year you were in college I thought, let him finish. Let him finish first. Don't put this on him while he's building his own foundation." He looked at his youngest son steadily. "And then you graduated. And I thought, let him get his footing in his first year of work. Let him settle." He paused. "I was going to tell you. I just kept finding a reason to move the date." Marcus was quiet. He looked at his father for a long moment with the complex expression of someone who is reconciling two versions of the same person and finding that the new, complete version is larger and more precise than anything he had been carrying before. "Thank you," he said finally. Not with qualification, not with complexity. The simple, direct statement of a son who had arrived, after everything else, at the only thing left to say. Steve Harvey, who had held himself at the edge of this entire scene with the self-control of a man who understood that some moments were not his to enter and some spaces were not his to fill, now stepped forward. He looked at Tommy Garrett. He looked at him with the full attention of someone who has seen a very great deal and recognizes, in this moment, something he has not seen before in this form. He looked at the hands resting on the podium, the hands of a man who had spent 20 years in physical work, that had mopped hallways and maintained boilers and cleaned bathrooms in an empty school building at 3 in the morning, while his wife slept, and his children dreamed and everyone he loved went undisturbed. He looked at the face of a 61-year-old man who had carried a specific weight for 20 years and had just, on a Tuesday morning in a television studio, finally set it down. Steve Harvey was not often without words. He stood there, and he was without words. And then he found them. What happened in the next 4 minutes became the most viewed clip in Family Feud's digital history within 30 days of the episode's air date. It was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. And that was exactly why it traveled the way it did. Steve Harvey turned to the studio audience. His voice was quiet. The voice of a man speaking, not performing, not building to something, but simply speaking to other people about a thing that matters. "Let me say something," he said. "And I need everybody to actually hear what I'm saying, because I mean this more than I mean most things that come out of my mouth on this stage." The studio was absolutely still. "This man right here," he said, and he did not gesture broadly. He simply nodded in Tommy's direction, the small nod of a man pointing to something real. This man was laid off from the job he had worked 15 years to build, at 41 years old, with 3 kids and a mortgage, and a wife who believed in everything he had built. He had 3 weeks to find an equivalent position. He couldn't. And he had a choice. He paused. He could have told his family the truth. Could have said, "We need to tighten things, we need to adjust, we need to figure this out together." That would have been honest. That would have been the reasonable thing. He stopped. Instead, this man put on a uniform at 10 o'clock at night for 20 years. He mopped hallways, he maintained boilers, he fixed toilets. He unlocked a school building before every child in that building arrived, and locked it back up when the last light was off. He did it in the dark, and he did it alone. And he did it with the full understanding that nobody, not his wife, not his children, not a single person who loved him, would ever know what they owed to that work. Steve's voice had not raised. It did not need to. And with what that job paid him, with what a school district night custodian's salary pays, he put 3 children through college without $1 of student debt. He paid off his house. He kept his family in the life they had built, and never asked a single person in that family to carry 1 ounce of the cost. The studio was not making a sound. "Now I want to ask you something," Steve said, and he turned his gaze across the full width of the room. "I want to ask every person in this room and every person watching at home, what do you call that?" He let the question sit, because I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't a lie. A lie is something you tell because you are afraid of what the truth will cost you. What Tommy Garrett told his family for 20 years was a shield. He held it up in front of everything he loved, and he carried it alone so that they would never have to feel the weight of it. He shook his head slowly. That is not deception. That is the most complete, sustained, self-sacrificing act of love I have ever heard described in 20 years of standing on this stage talking to families. Someone in the audience was crying. Then several people. Then more. "I want to say something else," Steve said. "I grew up watching my father work. My father did physical work. He maintained things. He cleaned things. He did the work that the world does not celebrate and does not put in the newspaper and does not name buildings after. And my father never, not one time in his life, made any of us feel that the work was beneath him or beneath us, because he understood something that took me a long time to understand. The work is not the man. The man is what he does with what the work gives him. And what the work gives him is the ability to take care of what he loves." He looked directly at Tommy. Tommy Garrett took care of what he loved, for 20 years, every single night, without exception, without recognition, without asking for anything back. He stopped. "I have been in shock since this man started talking," Steve said, and for the first time there was something that was almost a laugh in his voice, not comedy, but the release of someone who has been holding a large amount of feeling and has finally found a way to let some of it go. "Because I have never, and I want to be precise when I say never, I have never in all of my years on this stage been more moved by a human being than I am by this man right now." He turned back to Tommy. "You did what your father taught you," he said quietly. "Your father worked 30 years on a plant floor so that his family could look the world in the face without owing anyone anything. And you looked at your situation, alone at your kitchen table, and you decided, my family is not going to feel this. My children are not going to carry this. I am going to be the floor between them and whatever is underneath." He reached out and put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "That is not something a person does for 20 years unless what they are protecting is everything," he said. "And everything is exactly what you protected." The applause that came was not the applause of entertainment. It started in one part of the room and built, section by section standing. The sound layering onto itself until the whole studio was on its feet at once, and the noise filled every corner of the stage, and Tommy Garrett stood in the middle of it with his wife beside him and his 3 children around him, and the specific feeling of 20 years of held breath, finally, completely, released. The Garrett family won their episode. It was not close. They played with a cohesion and a calm that the production staff later described as among the finest family performances of the season, and it made complete sense. This was a family that had been held together by invisible threads for 2 decades, and on a game show stage with those threads finally and fully visible, they were very nearly unbeatable. Diane answered with the focused precision of a woman who had spent 30 years making correct decisions under pressure. Brandon's analytical instincts turned out to apply beautifully to survey questions. Keisha brought the energy that carried the room in the final rounds, and Tommy stood at his podium and answered every question the same way he had done everything for 20 years. Without hurry. Without flourish. Without missing. When the episode aired 8 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming and unlike anything the show's digital team had managed in a single week. The clip, 4 minutes and 31 seconds of Tommy's confession, the family's reaction, and Steve Harvey's words, was viewed 48 million times across platforms in the first week. It was shared by grief counselors and labor historians and family therapists and HR professionals and men who had been laid off and women who had rebuilt and parents who recognized in Tommy's decision something they had made or wished they had made or saw in someone they loved. It was shared by working people who had spent careers in jobs the world did not celebrate and found in Tommy's story something that named what they had been doing all along. The Dayton Daily News ran a front-page feature within 5 days of the air date. It included a statement from Dr. Carol Simmons, the principal of Jefferson Middle School, who had kept Tommy's secret for every one of the 20 years she had known it. Her statement was precise and direct, and traveled as far as the clip itself. "Mr. Garrett disclosed his full professional background to me on the night he was hired," she wrote. "He was completely honest with me about his history, his situation, and his reasons for the decision he had made. I kept his confidence because everything I observed about Thomas Garrett in 20 years confirmed what I had recognized in the first conversation, that I was in the presence of a man of exceptional character. He was the most thorough, reliable, and conscientious employee this school has had in my tenure here. He treated this building with more care than most people treat things they own. And he did it every night, for 20 years, without asking for recognition, because he had decided this was the work, and the work deserved to be done right." She paused in the statement. "I am proud to have worked alongside him. And I hope every parent of every child who walked through Jefferson Middle School's hallways over the past 20 years understands what kept those hallways clean and safe and properly maintained. It was Thomas Garrett. It was always Thomas Garrett." The statement was shared more than 3 million times. The Dayton Public Schools superintendent issued a formal commendation within 10 days of the episode's air. The Custodial Workers Union published a piece in 3 separate labor publications, calling Tommy's story the clearest, most honest illustration they had encountered of what maintenance work actually meant, the invisible, essential, unglamorous care of the spaces that children occupied every day, done by people who would never be thanked by name, and who did the work anyway because the work was real, and the people it protected were real. Tommy received letters, more than 5,000 letters in the first 6 weeks, from every state in the country and from several countries outside it. From fathers who had worked jobs they could not name at dinner parties and had spent years carrying the weight of that in silence. From children of those fathers who now, having watched Tommy's story, understood something about their own childhoods that had been true all along, but without language. From single mothers who had done everything Tommy had done, and done it without a partner, and recognized in his story the shape of their own. From school custodians, and hospital custodians, and office building custodians, and factory floor workers, and warehouse workers, and every category of laboring person who had spent their career invisible and who sent Tommy photographs of themselves at their stations with messages that said simply, "This is us. You said it for us." Tommy answered every letter he could, by hand. At the kitchen table where he had sat alone at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in April of 2003 and made the decision that the next 20 years had been built from. Diane, in the months that followed, gave several interviews. She chose her words the way nurses choose words, accurately, with the specific intention of naming things as they actually are. "People ask me whether I was angry," she said. "And the honest answer is that I was angry for approximately 40 minutes, sitting backstage after the taping. I was angry because I had spent 38 years believing I knew everything important about my husband, and I had been wrong about something significant." She looked at the camera directly. "And then I thought carefully about what he had actually kept from me. He kept from me the knowledge that we had ever been in financial danger. He kept from me the specific worry of wondering whether our children would be all right. He kept from me every morning of fear and uncertainty that would have been mine to carry if he had told me the truth." She paused. "He spent 20 years making sure that I never had to be afraid. Not one night. He carried all of it so I never had to carry any of it, and I was angry about that for 40 minutes. And then I decided I was going to spend the rest of our life together making sure he knows I understand what that was worth." Brandon spoke to a Columbus publication that ran his words on the front page of its weekend section. "I grew up thinking my father was a logistics manager," he said. "I thought his career was his identity. I grew up with a specific picture of what his working life looked like and what it provided, and I used that picture, without knowing it, as part of my own understanding of what was possible and what a man's work looked like." He stopped. "Now I know that his identity was us. His career was us. Every decision he made professionally for 20 years was made in the direction of our well-being. The picture I had of his work was wrong. The picture I had of what he would do for his family was perfectly accurate. I just didn't know the full cost of it." He paused. "I'm a software engineer. I have a good job and a graduate degree and a comfortable life. All of it was built on my father driving to a school building in the dark at 10 o'clock at night for 20 years. I don't know if I have that in me. I hope I do. I believe he put it there." Keisha said it simply, the way teachers say the things that matter most. "He taught me what showing up actually means," she said. "Not showing up when it's easy and visible and the world is watching. Showing up for 20 years in the dark when nobody knows you're there. That's what showing up means. I teach that to my second graders every single day. I am going to teach it differently now, because I understand it differently now." Marcus, the youngest, the one who had pulled the thread, took longer to speak publicly about it. When he did, he wrote a piece for a labor policy publication at his editor's request, and the piece was clear and precise in the way of someone who works with people and has had to learn to see them accurately. "I process layoffs as part of my work," he wrote. "I have sat across from people and handed them the documentation for the end of something they spent years building. I try to do it with care and directness. I have thought about what happens to those people after they leave the room, what they face, what they decide, how they carry it. I thought I understood it reasonably well." He paused in the piece. "I did not understand it the way I understand it now. My father showed me what a man can do with the fact of a layoff when the people he is responsible for are more important to him than his own comfort or his own pride or the world's opinion of his occupation. He showed me that in 4 minutes on a television stage. I am better at my work because of it. I am more importantly a better person because of it." 1 year after the episode's air date, the Dayton Public Schools held a small dedication ceremony at Jefferson Middle School. The main corridor, the hallway connecting the school's entrance to its cafeteria, The hallway that every child in the building walked through every single school day was named the Thomas E. Garrett Hall. A plaque was mounted beside the main entrance. Dr. Simmons spoke. Several teachers who had worked evening events over the years and had crossed paths with Tommy in the building came to say things to his face that they had never said while he was still working there, because they had not known what they were in the presence of. Tommy stood at the podium in that hallway, the hallway he had cleaned 10,000 times in 20 years. Under fluorescent lights at 2 in the morning with a mop and a bucket and the specific satisfaction of a job done correctly, and said what he felt was the only accurate thing. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "I am not exceptional. I was a man who needed work and found work and did it the best way I knew how, and used what it gave me to take care of the people I was responsible for. Every night custodian in every school in this country does exactly what I did. The only difference between my story and theirs is that someone pointed a camera at my family on a Wednesday morning." He looked around the hallway, at the clean floors and the maintained walls, and the windows that let in the afternoon light in long, warm rectangles. This building mattered. The work of caring for it mattered, not because of who was doing it, but because 800 children walk through it every single day, and children deserve to be somewhere that someone takes care of. I was glad to be the one who took care of it. I would do it again. He stepped back from the podium. The room stood. Steve Harvey sent a letter that Dr. Simmons read aloud at the ceremony. The letter was framed and hung in the school's main office, beside a photograph taken on Tommy's last night of work in the spring of 2023, a man in a dark custodian's uniform in an empty, immaculate hallway, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who is precisely where they decided to be and is at peace with every decision that brought them there. That the work, done in the dark, for the people he loved, had been more than enough. That what a man builds in the years when nobody is watching and nothing makes it easy is the truest picture of his character. Not the title he holds, not the business card in his wallet, not the story he tells at dinner parties, but the specific thing he does, night after night, in an empty hallway at 2 in the morning, when the choice to do it right costs him something real, and he does it right anyway. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the world gets to see what was built. And it turns out to be everything.